best year of the century.
Oh my gosh, like, I don't know about that, but.
My name's Anna Clock. I'm Koikan Athabaskan from Caltag and Iak from Cordova. I currently make my home on the land of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage. And Donna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Kuyana Anna, Akaling Algwa, Mamtigi Shigamiunga. My name is Donna Bach, Yupiunga. I'm Yupik, originally from Bethel, but I reside here in Anchorage, and I work as a Tribal Partnership Specialist for the U.S. Census Agency on the 2020 Census Decennial Count. However, I'm a tried and true Alaskan. I'm a member of the Ogut-Sagagamute Traditional Native Council, which is one of the larger tribes based out of Bethel. I'm also a Chilista, Doyon, and Bethel Native Corporation shareholder. So thank you for having me.
My first question for you, Donna, is how do voting and census affect our tribes and communities?
Well, I think, the way that I look at census is it's basically civic engagement 101 that almost precedes voting to a degree. The first census that was conducted in the United States occurred in 1790, right after the birth of our nation. And it was basically a mechanism to have an understanding of the population so that there was fair representation of, the people when they had issues to bring up as they formed their new government and as they paved the way to become the United States. And so the census is actually mandated by the Constitution to occur every 10 years. In 2020, it's the first census where people are actually able to participate and respond online. And for Alaska specifically, the first person in the nation was counted here in Alaska in Tooksuk Bay on January 21st by Director Steve Dillingham. So it launched off here in Alaska for remote Alaska, and it's still continuing. There's still time for people to respond. The census deadline where field operations will be wrapping up is September 30th. And that's basically a really rapid and quick deadline for our census takers, our census field operators. There's over, I think, 700, 800 employees that are working on the census to work in this very next important phase. It's almost like a peak operation phase to basically knock on household doors for people that have yet to respond to the census. And one note that I should mention is the remote Alaska count is done for a lot of our roadless rural remote communities. So, small villages like Caltag, Atmouthlook, Queethlook, a lot of our small communities, that count is complete. So we're not so much concerned about, remote Alaska being complete. What we really would like to sort of empower and elevate are the people that may be residing next door to you, or, your friends or family that may be residing in Bethel or Cordova, Yakutat, Sandpoint, Barrow, Bethel, Nome, Dillingham, Southeast communities. There's still time for people to respond, especially if they want to avoid a knock on the door or an unexpected visitor like a census taker coming to fill out the survey alongside with them.
So when you say complete, does that mean that people in those communities are no longer able to fill out their census?
They're complete in the sense that they can still call 1-844-330-2020, or they may have the option to respond online. But there is, if it's registered as a duplicate, census form, only one of them is going to be counted. Census Day is April 1st, so it's basically where do you live majority of the time, or where were you located on April 1st, 2020.
So how are we doing on census so far? Do you have any resources where we can see how many people are participating by community?
So for example, if you're an Alaska Native or a person living here in Anchorage, or you're in Juneau, or you're in Mat-Su, or Fairbanks, you should have already received your census invitation back in March or April. So it's with full confidence that every Alaskan living in a self-response area, larger census tracts, Homer, Kenai, we've already received our invitation to respond. And so what I'm going to share with you is sort of this self-response ranking. This is great information. You can find it at Public Tableau. It's sort of a database that's tracking 2020 census response rates. And so if you take a look at this, 63.4% of people across the nation have already responded to the census. And that equates to over 93.8 million people. And we know Alaska's big, but we also know our population is small, right? Like we're very sparsely populated, but we have a huge area. We're one of the hardest states in the nation to count. And if you look at this database, you can see for Alaska, the city that's doing the best in terms of self-response is actually Juneau, our state capital. And they're leading the way at 65.9%. Wow. You have Anchorage at 63%. So 63 is just on par with the national average. And you can sort of scroll down by these larger cities, even Saxman, like there's some great information that we can drill down. You can actually click on any of these and find a lot more information of how census response is going. But you can scroll down and see sort of the rankings. Anna, your town of Seward is, just under half. Okay. So a lot of people may anticipate receiving a door knock, maybe half the population if they haven't responded. Okay. And then Cordova, another place that I think you might have some community ties to, at 40%. And then my hometown, Bethel, is at 34%. So this can go all the way down to find out, if there's communities that are in a self-response area, you can find out how well that they're doing compared to the rest of the state. What I should share actually as well is for people to be aware of that Alaska, like Minnesota's at 72% response rate. If you scroll all the way down, Alaska is 51 out of 52. We're, our self-response is pretty much the lowest, and being low is not a good thing.
How does having a low number like that translate into representation in the government?
What happens is the Census Bureau delivers the population count to the president for the apportionment of congressional seats, and that information essentially cascades down to who represents us in the House of Representatives. But also when that information gets buttoned up by, I believe, May of next year, those numbers are then handed to our redistricting board or our redistricting committee. And we've heard that there are several names that have been announced, including Coeric's Melanie Banky, I think, is appointed by to be on that redistricting board. AFN's Nicole Borromeo is appointed. I believe John Binkley. I think it's a board of 5 people that essentially will get these numbers after the census is complete, and then it's their job to look at fair representation for our state legislature and who is going to be representing you wherever you might be living in Alaska to be your senator or to draw the boundaries of who your legislative representative might be.
One of the rules about redistricting is that each district is supposed to have the same amount of people in it. District 40T encompasses the North Slope Borough area, the Northwest Arctic Borough, and it covers a very large geographic area, which actually means it has less political power. And the way I think about it is this: there may be people living along the coast who have different needs from people who are living more in the interior and by the rivers, and yet they only have one person to represent them amongst folks who are making laws about how we're governed, deciding how to allocate funds, passing bills and resolutions.
Yeah, I think, I think, again, it goes back to the sparse population, the large geography of Alaska. It is a lot of pressure for whether it's Neil Foster representing District 39 and Senator Donnie Olson representing, District T. That's a lot of ground to cover. Same with Senator Lyman Hoffman. If you look at District S and 37, like Senator Hoffman covers the area all the way from McGrath all the way to Atka and Adak on the Aleutians. And we know it's because, there are small communities, but census and that apportionment numbers, landing into the hands of the redistricting board, they essentially have the opportunity to draw the lines based on what those numbers inform and tell them of.
Right.
And it drills down even further, and I think I should mention it. For more densely populated areas in, metropolises, whether it's Matsu or Anchorage or Fairbanks, that information also helps inform where funding goes to basically build schools or other basic infrastructure. So there's a whole plethora as to reasons why census data can help inform decision making. It can help inform, where to build better roads or access points. So just driving out to the Matsu borough, like you notice, that Matsu is the fastest growing community in our state, and you can tell by the level of infrastructure when you drive on those roads out in Palmer and Wasilla. So it's all aggregated from census participation.
You mentioned that there's relatively higher participation in the city of Anchorage. And so let's just see how that translates into these districts. Anchorage has basically a different district for each neighborhood. And so one city covering one small geographic area has all these different people representing us. And these are the amount of counts we get in when the legislature casts their votes on whether or not to pass a bill. Anchorage gets all these people in their corner, whereas some of the more sparsely populated or areas where people are not filling out their census, they might have one person.
Great example. And I think the same can be said. There's, more in the Matsu, there's more representation, there's more votes, same with like Eagle River. Like there's a higher concentration of representation in the more populated areas, and that can sometimes be can cause challenges, especially if we think about the historical urban and rural divide. I think I still have my form. Actually, I saved it.
You should share it. That's okay.
Edit out that whole thing. Sorry. Like 10 minutes later, I got my. It took me forever to find my census form. So,
but okay. So back to that point. If you got your invitation to complete the census but lost it in your mail pile and it disappeared into the multiverse, you can still fill it out.
Yes, there is still time. If you can't find it, you can go to my2020census.gov and on your smartphone or online, on your computer, on your iPad, and fill out the census. When you get there, this is basically what the website will look like when you start it, and it's safe, it's easy, important, it takes less than 10 minutes, and it's basically a surefire way to avoid someone coming to knock on your door. I'm going to start the questionnaire just to walk through, and it says, where can I find my 12-digit census ID? If you get a packet delivered to your door or a reminder, it may have that 12-digit ID. But if you don't have it, you just go below the login and it says, if you do not have a census ID, click here. And I'm gonna just do this for fun. I'm gonna put a US state or District of Columbia. And I'm gonna try this. It says, here's the address you submitted. If the address is correct, hit submit. What is your name and telephone number? So this is basically you enter truthfully your name. And I'm hoping that if I can do this, like as Jane Doe, it says how many people were living with or staying with you. I'd put in that number. I'm just gonna say that. The names listed so far, and then I could put, Joe, Jane Jr. Doe. Okay, so I'm just sort of like walking you through how easy it is, and if there are more people living with you, you can add them. Okay, so it's pretty user friendly. So were there any additional people? You can say no. And then the question is like, did you own it, rent it? That's basically the own or rented. And then it basically verifies, please continue answering the question for everyone. So let's assume that Jane Doe is me. I'm a female. I put in a date of birth. All right. And then here's the part where it gets to the ethnicity question. Like, what is your origin? And you can say yes or no to any one of those ethnicity questions. And here's where it can also get important. And this is the part where I want to give honor to understanding the difference between how you identify in terms of your race or ethnicity. And I'll pay special attention to being American Indian or Alaska Native. And you can see there's over 200 spaces that you can list up to 6 tribes, and it's about affiliation. It says enter name of enrolled or principal tribe, and it's about what tribe are you affiliated with. And so you can even list, Bethel, or in this case, I can say I'm Ogut Sagagamute Native Council. If I was part of like the traditional village of Eek, which I am not, but I could say, traditional village of Eek, or I could say, native village of Queefluck. Those are just like examples of what your tribe is. And the name of your village should suffice if that's who you're affiliated with. And so you can use and list up to 6, but it will time out after 6 villages. So very important point. And then you can go through and finish the census, for the other members of your family. So if you had, your son or your daughter, you would go through and do the same. It doesn't go much longer beyond that before you can hit submit. When we were speaking earlier, just talking about how this is essentially a stamp in time. And, if you believe in the sovereignty or you want to give honor to your tribal heritage or your village heritage, whether you're living on the road system or not, you have, I think, not only a constitutional obligation to complete the census, but I think as an honor to your tribe or all the tribal health services, whether it's a housing authority, Indian Health Service, the Alaska Tribal Health System, Johnson O'Malley grants like migrant ed grants that are disseminated even, throughout numerous school districts across the state. Like those numbers become extremely important for our children, and it's a stamp in time that I think also demonstrates a level of acknowledgement in the government to government relationship between our tribes and our federal government. And so we don't really know what the next decennial census question is going to be in 2030. But I think, for 2020, as hard and crazy of a year that it's been, it's like make your mark as a member of our sovereign tribal nations and give honor to that, because it's better to be counted than to be not counted.
Exactly.
Right?
So, we talk about how this affects the distribution of dollars. I thought that our tribes get money from the federal government based on how many people complete the census in our area.
Yes, they do. Yeah. So like there's over 320 census-driven federal programs that like the dollar amount exceeds $3.2 billion per year. I actually have this sheet. This is called Accounting for Dollars, a resource, and you see that big number. It says basically 3.2 billion. And if you visit the alaskacounts.org website, you'll see a lot of those free promo materials that says, there's 3.2 billion reasons why Alaskans should complete their census. And that's how much federal money we receive on an annual basis through census-driven programs. And of that 3.2 billion, approximately 1.3 billion, nearly 1/3 of it, is for our not just tribal, our comprehensive healthcare system in Alaska. So that includes Providence, Alaska Regional, Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation, Arctic Slope Native Association, Norton Sound Health Corporation, Tanana Chiefs Conference, Search in Southeast. All of our hospital systems in Alaska, nearly 1/3 of that 3.2 billion comes in through those federal programs. But that's just one aspect of it. There's community development block grants that local governments or municipalities apply for, rural sanitation, the DHE program, the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering, the community development quota programs like Norton Sound Economic Development, or APICTA, the Aleutian Pribilof Island Community Development, Bristol Bay Development Economic Corporation, all of Coastal Villages Regional Fund. Those are federally guided census-driven programs, and they're very important even to our rural economies to a higher degree.
Awesome. So when we fill out the census, we help bring more funding into these entities. Another thing we talked about is the power of the collective and the power we have as a collective if we start making that culture shift to engage with these systems.
Yeah, I think, there's so much fear and trepidation, and I think it's understandable when you're coming from a tribal perspective or through an indigenous lens. And there's, I think, a heightened level of understanding and empowerment that, our indigenous people have to be forward thinking and part of the solution. And I was sharing, the resource on Alaska Counts website, and this is a part of the Foraker group, and their members, Alaska Public Interest Research Group, champions all across the state, to put together these free campaign promotional ideas for anyone to use. And these can be found at alaskacounts.org. You have all of these leaders from all over the state advocating with testimonials. You have students from Mount Edgecombe High School from all over the state promoting the census. And so this level of advocacy that's coming from the collective, I think, helps sort of pave the path to shape the future. You might be one little stick or one little willow branch, but if everyone gets together, you could build a raft, to move the cause forward. And I think the same goes for, voting, for showing up when it counts. And census is just one basic But the next level is voting engagement, registering to vote, understanding the barriers. Like you said, you will be punished by law if you vote more than once, or gosh, in this time of COVID, you need a signer of the age of 18 to witness your signature before you drop your ballot in the mail. There are barriers. There are barriers to a lot of things, but that doesn't mean we cannot participate. But if anything, it gives us motivation to say we need to participate more and at a bigger and a higher level, and reach out to our friends or our neighbors or our colleagues or our aunties, our uncles, our brothers. We need to reach out to them and say, hey, are you doing this? Can you help me? Can you help me help our state? Can you help me help our representation? Can you help me shape the future by doing this simple thing? And I think when we as friends or neighbors make that ask of each other, it's going to mean more than what we hear on the radio or on an advertisement or a social media post. Having that conversation is going to mean the most.
Awesome. So I have internet, but if one of my aunties calls me and she doesn't have internet and doesn't have computer, but she wants help with her census, can I fill out the census for her?
Yes. You can. If she trusts you and you have internet and she trusts you to go through that information, absolutely. You can, be on the phone with Auntie. You can be on the VHF with Auntie, and as long as she tells you what her physical address is and is truthful about her responses and who's living with her, there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, I wish everyone could help do that. It'll make the workload less overwhelming.
Is there one thing that you wish people knew about filling out the census? What would that be?
That it's just safe, it's easy, and it's important. Like, that's the basic drill down. To me, it's about a solution-based initiative that can help improve, what we don't know about the future of our state for the next 10 years. That it's extremely private. Like, the information that you share on your permanent fund is less private than the information that you share on the census. The information that is gathered is only shared in an aggregate manner. There's no private information that's ever shared about you. That information will not be released for 72 years, which is sort of the average lifespan of, your average American. And if you were to look at the census almost like as a permanent fund dividend, it actually pays more. You don't necessarily see that money tangibly in your pocket, but it helps, with everything from infrastructure to housing, student loans, healthcare, education, basic infrastructure, bypass mail. Like, we know a lot of our rural communities rely on bypass mail subsidies. All of that information as a collective is extremely important. Those federal dollars are extremely important to Alaska, especially given our economic constraints with no tourism going on, with less producers, working on the North Slope, with a suppression of our small business economy based on the tourism economy being lacking. There's 3.2 billion reasons why the census is so important.
The general election is November 3rd. And again, in times of a pandemic, we're encouraging people to vote from home, and we have additional resources on applying for and submitting your absentee ballot. So check out those other videos. Donna, how long do we have to fill out our census?
September 30th is the new timeline. It was extended due to the pandemic to October 31st, but we just were informed on August 3rd that the time to respond is now September 30th. But there's still time. So let's estimate that there are 750,000 people in Alaska right now. And the impacts of an undercount, if one person goes not counted in your household, that's the equivalent of $3,000 per year for 10 years. So $30,000 potentially less that community receives. But if let's estimate 1% of 750,000, that's 7,500 people times approximately $3,000 per year at $22.5 million a year times 10. That's essentially $225 million that Alaska would leave on the table for the federal government to spend however it wants if we don't have an accurate count. Compared to 2010's decennial census, the participation rate in Alaska was the lowest in the country. And I find this so ironic because we're such a huge state that depends so much on federal dollars. I would just really like to see an improvement in that number, especially given the advanced timeline and less time that we have to finish the count.
We got this. We totally got this. We're gonna do it.
Let's have hope for the future. Let's shape our future.
Yeah, let's
make sure you count. And do this. I count.
Where's your 2020 sign?
Oh, it's right here.
Woo! Best year of the century.
Oh my gosh, like I don't know about that, but
Thank you so much, Donna, for sharing this. It's awesome to have, you're just a wealth of knowledge, and it's just awesome to have your insight and your resources and your perspective really working for our people.
Yeah, well, it's about the collective. It really isn't about me. Like, it's really about my love for Alaska, my love for the Native people all over Alaska, honoring tribal governments and their sovereignty, as well as honoring, and respecting the great nation that we live in and the land that we live in. And, there's obviously a lot of work. There's a lot of unknowns. With much certainty, my hope is that that we take a solution-based opportunity to say, what can I do to shape the future? And that's really the theme of the 2020 census is, how do we shape the future? This is just a really basic step. And you went through, redistricting, distribution of power. We talked about federal dollars coming not only to our state, but also about data. We know that in this time of the COVID and the pandemic, we're seeing spikes in COVID cases and numbers. Data is more important than ever. We're a data-driven society. And what I ideally like to see is a spike in census participation numbers and a fall in, obviously, COVID cases. And let's do our best to make it happen. Thank you, Anna. Appreciate the time.
Oh, Anna Masi, thank you.